Okay, so we're gonna be like giving a robot presentation. I wouldn't say there's like a specific main topic. We're just gonna go over a bunch of, I guess, important aspects of the robot side of things. And we have people from teams 254, 64, 987, and then 1622. And then we'll get into introductions later. You can go to the next slide, Ricky.
All right, so I'll be going first. So hello, my name is Daniel Yang. I'm on Team 64 Kryptonite from Katy, Texas. It's right outside of Houston, and I'll be talking about strategy and scouting. So a little bit about me. I'm from Team 64. I am a drive coach, strategist, and head programmer for our team. And in 2019, we were the winners of the First in Texas, Austin, and Channelview district events. So the first question is simple. What is strategy and why do we do it? So strategy, as according to Google, the greatest source on planet Earth, is a plan of action or policy designed to achieve a major or overall aim. And so for FRC, it's about planning for success. And that definition of success can vary a lot. And so it encompasses more than just a single match. All right, so with strategy, there are two main types. There is game analysis and there is match planning. And so we'll be covering both of these. So first, we'll talk about game analysis. Game analysis is all about understanding the game manual. So at the beginning of the season, they'll release the game manual, which is about 130-ish pages, which covers all the rules you need to know about this year's game. It'll cover the different robot rules. It'll cover how you play the match. It'll cover what you're allowed to build. It'll cover like what the drive team can look like, and it'll also explain how you score points, how you like do penalties, and how much penalties are worth. So it's a really, really important document, and you'll be referencing it throughout the season. So there are a couple of major sections that we'll be going over. The first one is the arena overview. So the arena overview defines a couple of key terms within the game. So for this year's game, we'll use Infinite Recharge as an example. It defines a lot of terminology that they use. So they talk about the shield generator, and in their videos and in most literature, they say you go to the shield generator to do this. Well, the arena overview section will go in depth about what the shield generator is and where it refers to. Another key thing that's done in the arena overview is it defines a lot of sections and zones within the gameplay. So this year we had I think it was called the trench zone, which is in the far back of the field. And there are certain limitations based on where your robot was. And so reading through this section is really important because it gives you the language and the vocabulary needed to understand the rest of the guide. Next, the next important section is about, match planning. So match planning, the most important parts is it covers the point values and ranking points. So within FRC, there are two types of scoring, basically. The first one is point values. So that's your typical, in a match, you're trying to earn points. So in this year's game, you could earn points by shooting power cells, or climbing or hanging at the end, spinning the color wheel, crossing the initiation line. These are all points that you would earn within an individual match. And then you have something called ranking points. Ranking points determine your overall seeding at the end of the event. So it's not just based on your win-loss record. So in most years, you will win 2 ranking points for winning the match, 1 ranking point for getting a tie, 0 points for losing the match, and typically there are 2 ranking points that are associated with a certain objective within the game that you work as an alliance. So this year, one of them was earning at least 65 points through the end game with climbing. In 2019, it was earning 15 points through the end game. 2018, one of them was making all 3 robots like being defined as having climbed, and then the other one was all 3 robots crossing the initiation line. So each year it varies, and usually these are the points that are harder to get and require you to work together as an alliance. And the last major section is the rule sections. So the rules govern just about everything. They govern robot construction, so how tall your robot can be, like your frame perimeter. It governs what is and isn't allowed on the robot, so certain types of motors, certain types of parts. Gameplay, So that just involves like what you're allowed to do during the game and what you're not allowed to do. So from during certain parts of the game, you're not allowed to shoot any power cells. During other parts, you're allowed to shoot it. So you have to be aware of that. And then also it covers some basic safety rules. So don't step over the railing, and only enter through the gates, listen to any officials or volunteers on their instructions. So those are the three main sections. There's also a couple of other sections scattered in there that aren't as important, but the first time going through it, it's always good to read through the entire game manual and see what it is. And then the next part is match planning. Match planning is broken down into pretty much three categories: before a competition, before a match, and after a match. So before a competition, you need to discuss how you think the game should be played, right? When you watch the game animation and you're reading online on like Chief Delphi, which is a forum where a lot of people discuss about FRC and how to play the game, and you should have an understanding of how you think the game will be played. Should robots be playing defense? Should you be focusing on scoring for this objective, or should you build a robot that can do this? And then before a match, you need to get with your alliance, so to get the other two teams, and you discuss a strategy. Which robot is doing what? Sometimes game pieces are limited, so it can be difficult for all three teams to be doing the same thing. And in that case, you have to decide, are two teams going to be focusing on this one objective and the other team going to go play defense? Are we going to like split up the field and break it into zones so each team controls their own zone? And how do we want to do this? And then after a match, you also need to get with your drive team and break down the match and talk about what went right, what went wrong, how could you improve it, and what can you do for the next time in the next match. And so you should always be breaking it down. And it's great if you can get video of the match to watch. All right, and then the last topic I want to cover a bit is scouting. So scouting is something that newer teams have difficulty doing because it requires a lot of extra manpower. Scouting is basically the gathering data about other teams at the competition. And so this is important because it allows you to use data to assess each team's strengths and weaknesses. So that way, when you go plan for a match, you can see, hey, this robot isn't necessarily as good at scoring power cells. So let's have them do defense or something similar. So this way you can make your alliance strategy as sound as possible. And then top teams also use this data to determine who to pick. So sometimes if you're aware and conscious of of how you're individually performing, you can tailor this and like present yourself to top teams and see, like try to get yourself picked. All right, so does anyone have any questions?
We could also go over questions at the end too, if you guys
Yeah.
have questions now, have questions later.
So I think who's
Um,
next?
I got a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so in regards to like competitions, I know this year is kind of it's like it's a huge change and the transition to kind of doing it virtually now. I guess per se, it's how would we actually do that? Like, let's say we do get to the point where we might have the ability to scout other teams, but it's like virtual, right? It's like we're doing it just in our school rather than going to actual places. How would that work out? Or what would be your best
So
advice?
my best advice. So we haven't talked much about how we're going to approach virtual because a lot of the details are unknown at this point. But the general approach is you want to gather as much relevant information about a robot. So what kind of drivetrain they use, what they're capable. So can they shoot? Because some robots can't even shoot or pick up balls. Some robots can't climb. So you want to gather what this robot is actually capable of, right? And what the team tells you. The next thing the scouting is important is how the robot actually performs, right? Because um, it's kind of like business, right? Like everyone kind of pushes, like inflates what they're actually able to do. And so watching them on the field and gathering like how many balls did they score? Like did they climb successfully at the end? Did they break down in a match? Were they committing a bunch of fouls? And gathering all that data and being able to look at that and actually assess the team for yourself, that's the next like step of data collection. And so with virtual competition, because it might just be purely individual, the need for scouting may be diminished a lot. But if we do get back to like in-person events, that's kind of where you're going. You're just collecting data about the how the robots are performing.
Thank you, Daniel.
No problem.
Seems like there's no questions, so I think we can move on.
All right. So, hello everyone. My name is Pranav. I'm the tech director of Team 254, the Cheesy Poos. Ricky, do you want to go to the next slide? Yeah. Just a few things about me. I like to CAD. These at the bottom, there's a few of the robots that I've designed with a friend. Next slide. Yeah, so to start off with, just talking a bit generally about what is CAD. So CAD stands for computer-aided design or computer-aided drafting. It's basically 3D modeling, and there's a bunch of different CAD programs. You can see a few here: SolidWorks, Fusion 360, Onshape. So yeah, there's a variety of different CAD softwares out there. It's pretty common in industry for mechanical engineering or other types of engineering. Why do we CAD? So in FRC, it's important to CAD for a variety of reasons. First of all, it allows us to see what the robot looks like before we actually start manufacturing any of the parts. So this helps more on the aesthetic side. We can also test how different components fit together. It's like, do these two shafts and this plate, do they all work together well? We can check for collisions. Like, for example, if we have two different subsystems in a very tight space, we can make sure that when we're designing the subsystems, they don't collide with each other. We can also calculate the robot weight, which is really helpful if you know you're building a really big robot. Maybe you want that guarantee that you know it's going to be under 125 pounds before you actually commit to start manufacturing it. Next slide. Yeah. So now I'm going to talk a bit about the design process behind an FRC robot. So the first step is brainstorming. And so this is after you've done the game analysis that Daniel talked a bit about. And basically, you want to look at your season goals and you want to kind of tailor your robot goals to match. So for example, if you want to be able to win a competition or seed first, then you might build a robot that can do everything that isn't relying on your alliance partners, or that can complete all the ranking points. Versus maybe if you want to be the first pick of one of the top alliances, you might just focus on scoring and getting as many points as you can because you're not as worried about the ranking points. So you should look at your season goals and kind of make a list of what your robot should be able to do. One way you can organize this is into must-haves, nice-haves, and explorers. That's what our team does. On the right, you can see a picture. This was taken from our 2019 technical binder. And you can see how we kind of went through each part of the game, the sandstorm period, what our intake should be like, what kind of scoring we should be able to do. And we just made a list of must-haves, nice-haves, and explorers. And so basically must-haves are things that a robot should be able to do. These are our top priorities. Nice-to-haves are things that maybe our robot could do it, maybe not. It doesn't really matter either way. And then explorers are just like wild ideas that we're just maybe explore in the future, investigate more to see if it's even possible. So after brainstorming, the next two steps I'm going to talk about kind of happen simultaneously. The first one is prototyping, where you take the different ideas you had for your robot, the different robot goals, and you come up with ways you can actually achieve them. So for example, how are you going to shoot the ball? How are you going to intake the ball? And then you build different types of prototypes. At the beginning of the season, they might be more low fidelity, just a bunch of wood pieces bolted together. But then towards week 2, week 3, they might start becoming more sophisticated, maybe building them out of metal instead of out of wood. And so you can see at the bottom, there's a few examples of prototypes. On the left is Miss Daisy 341 from 2012. So this was their shooter. In the middle was 1114 from the same year. And then on the right, that was our team's full robot prototype. We called it Skystalker from 2014. So you can kind of see there's a variety of prototypes, different levels of fidelity. And then the important thing to do as you're prototyping is you should be gathering data, testing different variables. How much ball compression should you have? Maybe how high off the floor should your intake rollers be? And gathering data, figuring out what design constraints work best. And so you should also be continuously improving your design. So maybe you figure out that a certain level of compression that's best. Okay, now you move on to which type of wheel works best. So it's a constant process of like looking at your design, improving and testing. Next slide. Yeah. And so while you're doing this, you're also going to be working on the robot architecture. So this is where you decide what the robot is looking like. So you look at all 3 different prototypes, you get an idea of which ones work, which ones you want on your actual robot, and then you start to decide how everything packages together. And so this could be like just napkin sketches showing like maybe how, okay, from a side view, this could be what a robot looks like, to more sophisticated sketches, or even what we call cartoon CADs, which are basically simplified CADs of the robot, like super simple, only a few parts to represent the subsystems. You can see a few examples at the bottom. So on the left there, this was one of our original robot concepts from this year, actually, 2020. And so you can see we had like this snake-shaped serializer going into a shooter. And then on the right, that was a different robot. So basically, these are just super simple kind of proof of concept CADs to see, okay, does everything fit together? Maybe how much space will this subsystem take up versus a different subsystem? It helps you kind of figure out how everything goes together. Yeah, and so after you do your prototyping, you have your cartoon CAD, you come up with the robot architecture. That's when you start actually CADing. So the best way to do this is divide and conquer. You know, maybe assign a few students to each subsystem, and then you should also kind of work your way up. So on our team, the first thing we design is always the drive base, because it's pretty standard, and it also it kind of defines how all the other subsystems are going to be, because we have to figure out how we're going to mount all the other subsystems to the drive base. So, you know, we kind of start with the drive base and then work our way up, maybe the superstructure, the elevator. And so, yeah, just dividing up the subsystems. You can work on multiple at the same time. Just make sure that you're not going to run into problems later on. And one thing that'll help with this is very important, is communication. So you should always be communicating with other people designing. Maybe you're working on the same subsystem, just different parts. You should make sure that you're communicating, okay, so in my part, this is where your thing is going to go. And so, you know, just communicating the design constraints that maybe affect other parts of your subsystem, or even other subsystems entirely. Like I mentioned before, mounting provisions for different subsystems. You just need to make sure that it all integrates together and works well. Next slide. Yeah. So just a few tips when it comes to designing your robot, a few things to keep in mind. The first one is you should try to keep your design modular. So this means that like maybe later on in the season, you come up with another great idea for how what your robot could be like. And so you want to make sure that you have the capability to kind of swap out different subsystems. So maybe this could be through extra tool access, easy tool access, you know, maybe some holes so you can get a T-handle or an end wrench into a tight spot so you can easily undo a screw that holds a subsystem in. You could add space in your IGUS chain for extra wires if you want to add something later. You could do standardized mounting, so maybe using Versa frame, which is easy to just change the mounting of it. Or you could do some sort of like we did some years. We basically make the superstructure, you can bolt the superstructure on, and so you can also bolt it off, so you can basically pull off the entire top half of the robot. And you should also keep iterating. You know, there's always something to improve, so either looking at what other teams are doing, seeing if there's something you can adapt, or just looking at your robot saying, okay, maybe here there's room for improvement, let's talk about how we can do that. And, you know, coming up with more designs to accomplish that. Yeah.
Since Pranav is done, should I start presenting now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to be talking about build management. My name is Ricky Osako, and I used to be on the High Rollers 97 as a student. I'm currently now a mentor for them remotely. So I was the former CAD lead of T987, and I was also the former vice president of build, which would be build manager or whatever you like to call it. I've participated in FRC for 3 years, and we're gonna take my dog Kuma along the way because I'm at college and I miss him a lot. So I'm gonna talk about why build management is important. So it's very important in planning for subsystems for specific areas such as pneumatics, mechanics, and CAD. And that also helps you understand which students work better with each other. For example, if you've seen that picture right here, the one on the computer, his name is Cameron, and the one working on the robot, his name is Mario. And they both, I saw during the off season that they were really good friends. They worked well with each other. So that's why I put them together in the same team. They're not in the same sub teams, but they work really well together, and that's why I teamed them up together for prototyping and such. This also does prepare you for the build season when it starts and how to approach it, because you don't want students that don't like each other, or you don't want students that will cause drama and such. You want to be very careful with who you pick and why they should be chosen. So build management, how can it be practiced and implemented? So it's important to practice before the season starts because you don't want to be unprepared with the teams. You need to first establish teamwork before the build season starts and establish the main leadership. Which student is going to be the build leader, who's the most responsible. Because if you, during the build season, if you don't have any leadership, then it's going to go all out of control and no one's not going to know who to look up to and such. So remember to divide the teams correctly, and there's a bad correction there, so I need to fix that later, because you don't want 10 people in the CAD team and then like 3 people in the electronics team. You need to know who works with which better and why they do it better, and make sure the sub teams are relevant to the build, because you don't want like I guess kind of a relevant one would be like a wood cutting team if it's just going to be for prototyping only and they're going to stuff like that. And continuing on that, the best time to practice build management is kind of during the off season. For example, like team bonding. It's a little bit harder this year because of COVID. So there could be like playing games with each other, like there's Scribio or this new game called Among Us. Just get to know each other better, because if you go into build season or comp not even knowing each other or not even know how to talk to each other, then there's going to be some issues that come along the way. There's also off-season projects you could practice on. Working on a project kind of like I guess for CAD, you could make a mechanism that you see from other teams. You don't need to use CAD. You could talk about drawing, or I think for this season, teams are tasked with making like their own game. Is that right? Yeah, so like maybe you guys could talk about that during the off season before the actual season stuff starts. And there's not too much about build management I can talk about, but there is some few things that I want you to remember. There is never one right way. You don't need to approach one specific task really sternly. You can always change it up. Like let's say one year, oh, I wanted to have 3 people as the build leaders to keep track of each other, or I wanted to have 1. It can always be different. Develop your own techniques for leading teams. But sometimes you can take from the best. Sometimes that works as well. One thing you need to know, never let stress get to you. You see in the left corner, that was me sometimes during the build season this year and last year. I was never always happy because I let a lot of all the work get to me, and it's never fun. So you need to remember how to control that and arrange that, and know your limits. Even my dog Kuma knows right there. Sometimes I can get too tired sometimes, and you need to know that. That's it. It's not too long, but remember that build management is really important, but know how to control it as well. Does anyone have any questions?
What breed is your dog?
My dog, he's a blue heeler. Yeah, he's a blue heeler. That's it. And he's fat, but that's another thing I can say. Any other questions?
I don't know if I missed it, but is what you're implying the mechanics team is basically broken down into its own sub teams?
Yes. So during the build season, not like this year, but in prior years, sometimes you'll get a game, right? And it could be like a ball game or a shooting game and such. You would have like certain mechanic teams during the build season. Let's say like one would work on the intake, another would work on the shooter, and another would work on the drivetrain. So, but you would kind of do that during the off season. You would say like, oh, I know this student works well with him, so I put him in that group. I know these people know each other kind of well. I put them in that group, kind of like that, if that makes sense. Awesome. Any others?
Ricky, right?
Yes.
Hey, I just have I'm gonna put you in a hypothetical like situation, and hopefully you can answer through it.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah, as that's gonna be my question. So like, let's say you really know that person, they're your friend, but they start to notice that, hey, this, he's smarter than me, and or she's smarter than me, and I'm probably gonna let them do all the work. So in that case, that person recognizes what their friend is doing, and they want to stop that. It's easy to just say, hey, can you please work? But I know I've had some experience where some people, they just like to social loaf, and they just don't do it. So how would you handle those situations if it kind of endures throughout the whole season?
So I understand what you mean. You're saying like there are some students who are kind of shy to learn, and there's some other students who don't even work at all.
Yeah.
So for the people who are shy, I usually sometimes I'll notice it and I'll talk to the student like, hey, is there anything we can do to help? And then we always remind our students, you do not need to be smart to do robotics. Like you definitely don't need to be smart because I'll give an example. Like I don't get the greatest grades, but I know how to do mechanics and CAD, so I take that. And I know there are some students who are really shy to talk to others. I'm not gonna push it. I'll slowly nudge onto them, like, hey, it's okay. You could share your ideas. It doesn't need to be the right thing, but as long as you give an idea, it's better than nothing. And then there are the students who don't even work at all. I won't go like, hey, get to work. If they're not working for a long period of time, I'll probably go tell them, hey, you're kind of not helping our team. I would like you to leave please, and come back next time until you've decided to help our team. And sometimes, obviously, there are those who are really annoying, and they'll probably say like they won't even leave. Then that's where you get your mentor to come in, because you don't want to be the student to handle that. Then you get the mentor. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ricky.
Yeah, there's never one way to approach it, obviously, but the one thing you don't want to do is beat a villain. You don't want to be antagonizing towards them. If
Right.
you don't want to do it, then have your mentor do it, because the mentor obviously is adult here.
Right. Understandable. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? All right, cool. I'll hand this off to the next person.
I'm Amelia, and I'm gonna be presenting on electrical incorporation. So just to start off, a little bit about me. My name's Amelia, and I'm currently the electrical lead for Team 1622. And I've been a member of like the FRC team at our school for the past 4 years, and I'm also a member of SWE Next. So we don't have a lot to cover with electrical stuff today because I don't want to get into like telling you about every single component because that'll take forever, but we'll just go over some of the basics. So the electrical sub team, we're just in charge of creating an electrical board and wiring the whole robot. And it sounds intimidating at first, but it's a pretty like uniform process because everyone uses the same components, like the same like power distribution panels and like the same radios, and there's a lot of outlets where you can look for help. And then also we do use CAD a lot to design electrical boards and protective devices for electronics throughout the whole robot. So a lot of and what Parav was talking about earlier with modularity, that's a big part of electronics, because sometimes we have to work around mechanical and we have to try our best to like do whatever's best to hold the best mechanical designs. We have to like split up our electrical boards, which can get tricky sometimes, but like that's just the reality of FRC robotics. And then as well, you do learn a lot of skills that if you want to go into electrical engineering when you're older will help you out a lot. So in my freshman year, I learned how to solder, which is when you're like using metal or stuff called solder to connect wires together with a heat pen or a gun. And then also we do a lot of crimping and stripping where you work with wires to like take off the insulation and attach devices to them where you can connect to other wires. And then troubleshooting is another important factor in electronics. We do work a lot with the programming team to try to, especially with motor controllers, to try to figure out if anything's wrong with them, because usually something is sometimes. So you have to work closely with them. And then you just learn a lot of basic knowledge about coding as well and mechanics, and this like helps you make the best board possible. And then we can go to the next slide. Oh wait, oops, I forgot to, so the next one after that. Sorry. That was the past slide for what I just said. I totally forgot. Anyways, so these are just two examples of what I think are pretty good electrical boards. Again, we want to try to keep it like as small as possible if we can. And wire management is crucial to having like effective robots and stuff. Like that's been problems in our team in the past where like tangled wires leads to like our radio getting disconnected or just random stuff like that. It can all be solved if you just manage your wires. And then, okay, next slide. So some important things to remember are, so as I said previously, wire management is crucial to having minimal errors. And then a big thing on our team as well is communication with other sub-teams, because it's hard sometimes when the sub-teams aren't communicating well and then mechanical like put something in the place of where the electrical board was supposed to be. And then we just aren't able to like make the most effective robot because we have to make a lot of changes last minute. And then also with programming as well, they do need a lot of time. So we want to try to get the electronics done as fast as possible. And then so we also have a like big focus on being safe with electronics, especially with the batteries. Like you have to be very careful. Sometimes they spark randomly. I don't know why, but yeah, electronics can be dangerous. And then another big thing is we want to make sure the wiring is protected from the robot wheels or other moving parts on the robots. Like again, as I said earlier, it's easy for things to get snagged on other components when they're not compressed enough into the robot. And yeah, that's about it. I don't really have too much to go over, but is there any questions about electrical?
Wait, for your electrical components, you're talking about modularization, right? Like, so you can always access it during like game day and competition.
Or sorry, could you repeat the question?
So like for your like the electrical board, would you be able to access that or like fix things during the competition day?
Oh yeah, that is actually, I should go over that. It's very important to have it in like an accessible spot. Like other years we've put it on the bottom of the robot, but we've had hinges so we could slide the board out so we could work with it. So yeah, it is important to have access to it during the games and stuff. And that has also been a problem in our team in the past, is it's been like under too many subsystems, which has caused problems. So yeah, you always want to make sure it's like an accessible place. And that goes back to communicating with the other sub teams and trying to get the most optimal spot possible. Yeah, thank you. Good question. And then if that's all, we could pass it on to Madeline. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna go over robot documentation. So, like I said earlier, my name is Madeline Nguyen. I'm the VP of Robot for 1622. I was also a chairman's presenter last year. I've been driver for the last 2 years. I'm going to my 6th year in FIRST. I'm a junior in high school. I'm a Dean's List winner, and I'm the coolest person in this presentation. Someone changed that. But Next slide. So why is robot documentation so important? It helps keeps a record of past robots and mechanisms. It helps keep people accountable for their work. So if you assign someone something to do and they're supposed to document their progress of that assignment, it helps keep them accountable and reliable for what they're doing. It's good for presenting robot ideas and concepts to the rest of the team. It can be good for updating team members on the progress of the robot, and it could also be used for training, especially if your team wants to create a training, I guess, curriculum for rookies. And then it's also good for recording past problems and solutions. So some good examples of robot documentation, meeting minutes, basically like an overview of what you did during the meeting or an agenda. Gantt charts are basically big spreadsheets that have dates and basically gives a good illustration of what goals you want to accomplish throughout a period of time and when it's going to happen. And it gives you a really good overview of like the entire season. It's fairly common for teams to have a Gantt chart for their entire build season. And the napkin sketches, like Pranav said earlier, just quick sketches that people make on whiteboards, papers, stuff like that. Brainstorm sketches, very similar. Presentations and slideshows. It's also fairly common for teams to do like slideshows every week to show off like mechanisms of what they're working on or when they're presenting ideas to mentors and other members. Pictures of prototypes, mechanisms, and iterations of the robot. Those are always fairly important, you know, taking pictures of your progress during the build season, what you've built, what you've done, and then a bill of materials, which is actually one of the normal requirements. I don't know if it's required this year, but it's basically a list of all of the materials they use on your robot and the cost, because you're only allowed to use or spend so much money on the robot. And then progress reports on how certain members are doing, what they're working on, their assignments, and then etc. There's tons of more examples of robot documentation. So basic guidelines for documenting your robot. Basically take pictures of everything, like sketches, paper sketches, prototypes, mechanisms, because you could always delete photos, but you can't like fake photos of stuff. So it's always fairly important to take pictures of everything. Meeting minutes / progress reports. So you don't necessarily need to do like documentation on every single meeting, but it's probably a good idea to keep record of all the notable, I guess, assignments or progress your team has made for a meeting or over a span of like a week. And it's always fairly good to do like some sort of report or written document of what your team has done during a week during build season, because there's only like 6 to 7 weeks. So it's not super difficult, and it's also a good way to keep track of how your scheduling is doing during build season. And then document who does what, right? So during meetings, if let's say a certain group of people or a person is in charge of some sort of assignment or task, it's really good to document who's doing it and their progress. Because not only does that kind of keep everyone organized with what they're supposed to do, but it also makes sure people are accountable for what they're doing, making sure that they stay on task, making sure that they're working on what they're supposed to work on. Next slide. So how is documentation used for judging? Majority of teams keep an engineering notebook / binder in their pit during competitions that show their progress throughout build season. These aren't always necessarily used with judges, just because judges are really only there for a very short amount of time and they don't really want to see all of your documentation because that's just a lot of time used up. But it's always good to have on hand, especially if you don't have or you don't know something and you need to look at it real quick, and just in general, good to have in your pit. And many teams use their documentation that they did over build season to make pamphlets, posters, and handouts to give out during competition to other teams, to scouts, to give to teams that they want to be in alliance with, and then of course giving it to judges. And it's normally like a simplified version of key concepts and ideas and problems that you had over build season, and then also something going over different aspects of your final robot, statistics like motors used, what type of drive system, stuff like that. Next slide. So where do you store all the documentation? You have a few different options. Personally, what our team does is we have a server because we also have an engineering academy where we keep all of our files on, but it's kind of expensive. So it's definitely not the best choice. Unless your school already has a server, it's definitely not something that you should go out of your way to get. I think one of the more common solutions teams use is a team email / Google Drive. We have a team email, and the reason why that's so nice is since it's all in the cloud, you can make sure that team Gmail account owns all of your team documents. So basically, like seniors who are graduating don't have to worry about giving ownership to like the new members or like sharing stuff, because if the team email owns everything, then you can always access it through there. or on a team computer. If your team has like a classroom computer or laptop, that's good, but that's also kind of unreliable. Let's say if you need to access something at home, you can't really go and just get the school computer. Next slide. Now, who's in charge of documentation? So realistically, everyone on the team should be helping out with documentation, but of course, there's a certain extent to how much they should be helping out. Now, leads especially need to make sure that they have essential documentation and photos needed. And then, of course, it's important to have a media person who's designated for taking photos and stuff. Next slide. Next slide. And that's it. Questions?
For your guys' what is it, your binder, right? You talked about. Does that have everything you have? You just like print it out.
Can you repeat that question again?
Your binder of all the engineering documentations, you print out all of your stuff.
So yeah, so what we normally do is during the build season, we just put everything into like a document, like photos and everything, and then at the very end of the build season, we print everything out and put it in sleeves, and then put it into a binder. Any other questions? And there could be questions for like everyone who presented.
Yeah, this question is kind of like out there in general to everybody. But like from your experience with all your FRC teams, do you guys hold anything like you hold any special events like team bond events where you do something on a particular, date like Christmas, Halloween, etc.?
Before I answer that question, Ricky, can you stop sharing your screen? Since we're done with the presentation. So I think from our experience, we always have like fun events where like team parties and stuff like that. And then at the end of the entire season, we do like a team social. Last year we had it at like our president's house because he had a pool. But yeah, we always have like a team social at the end of the year. And then normally our drive team, since it's really essential for them to all be working together and stuff like that, and really be well bonded, we always do team bonding events with just our direct team.
Gotcha.
Should I answer that as well?
Yeah, you guys answered the question too.
Okay, so it kind of changes for our team every year. So we don't really have a specific one, but sometimes it could go varying from a movie night or like a game night or just something that goes with the whole team. Sometimes for me, since I was the CAD lead, I'd take my CAD students out to get food with me so we could bond a little bit more all with each other. So we can understand each other, and so then I have a better communication with them. I'd usually tell that to my mechanics lead or electronics leads as well. Just getting the teams to get to know each other better, so then it's easier for everyone to communicate during the build season.
Right, gotcha.
Tengo una pregunta. So for everyone who has presented thus far, I was very curious because you guys sound very technical. Do you learn these things along the way, or did you have like classes in school? Did you take certain workshops, or do you just like figure it out? And it's like experience based.
I can go first on that one, and I like went into robotics, like joining FRC, like knowing like pretty much nothing. So, and then, like, I mean, I had very good teachers, like the leads when I was a freshman were very good, but most of the time, like, you have opportunities to just learn as you go on the team. And like CAD too, I think. Actually, I won't speak for the CAD team, but like there's a big focus on like learning CAD, like during robotics. So I wouldn't worry if you don't like know too much about it, if that's where you're going. But yeah.
I would say I picked up most of like, I don't know, like jargon, if you will, like just from being there, like talking to other people. And I think it helps when like you have mentors who have like done this for a lot of years, or if you have talk to other teams that have done this for a lot of years, because then like they'll just use the terms very casually, and then you can just be like, hey, I don't like really understand what you're meaning by this. Could you like explain? And then like most of the time they'll just explain what it is, and then you'll start naturally using it because it's most of the terms we use are quite common throughout all of FRC.
I'll go next. So what I learned was definitely through my team. Sometimes it was during my manufacturing class at school, and then other times during this off season, I kind of trained myself through CAD or some other mechanics through projects and such. And definitely do talk to mentors and other experienced people. It doesn't always just have to be with FRC. It could be in other areas in general.
I'll answer next. So I think kind of like Amelia, when I first came onto the team, I knew nothing. I had no idea what FRC was. I didn't know how to design, how to CAD, none of that. And so I kind of during the first off season kind of just learned. And I think the way I learned how to CAD was just kind of like watching over other people's shoulders as they were designing different subsystems. And I think that's the best way, like just getting experience, watching other people, asking questions like, hey, what is this doing? Like, how did you do this? Can you show me that again? And so, just don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, just like with what Pranav said, just in general, working and talking with your team members and even people from outside of your team, because more than likely, like any other FRC team or FRC student will be more than happy to answer questions, especially with a rookie team. In general, the community is very nice and they're more than willing to teach new people.
Thanks for the responses, everyone.
Are there any other questions?
Okay, I have a question. Sorry if my mic or audio is bad, but how would you guys, you guys have any tips on how to handle such a large group since most of the teams are like 20 plus people?
Have a loud voice.
So something that we do is every 5 years we go through and reevaluate how our leadership system's done and how effective it is and where the weaknesses are. And basically we go through and either we add new roles or change up the roles or keep the same roles, and then we exactly define what each role is supposed to do or what they're in charge of. So when leaders get elected into their leadership spots, they know exactly what they have to do, and if they don't do it, we impeach them.
So for handling big groups, I was being serious about having a loud voice. You do need to have a loud voice for people to listen to. And then another thing is, since you have such a large group, there's obviously going to be a few students who know what they're doing, and then a few students who are completely new to robotics. So what you do, you split those groups up. You need to have a veteran team member with a rookie team member, so they both get the experience out of it. Because you don't want just a full-on rookie team and a full-on veteran team working individually, because then no one's really learning. Veteran teams are learning the same thing they already knew. Rookie teams are learning nothing. So you need to be very careful about how you're doing that. And make sure you divide it up on a whiteboard or a Google Docs, so you know, oh, this person's with this, instead of just memorize it all in your head, because you're never going to memorize such a huge group.
Yeah, and another strategy is kind of taking that big group and splitting it up into smaller, more manageable groups. So last year, one thing that our team started was we made technical sub-teams. So, we have the design sub-team, the manufacturing sub-team, assembly and wiring sub-team, programming sub-team. And so, because we have a really large team, I think this year we have around 60-something students on the FRC team. So we basically split all of them up into the different sub-teams, and then each sub-team leader is kind of in charge of, training those students with the skills they need, managing them, making sure they're attending the builds or whatever. So yeah, just kind of have a bunch of leaders and then delegate all the responsibilities, which makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, our team has a very similar system to what Pranav was describing. We have a core leadership, which is partially elected by the students. And then from there, we kind of break down the roles into sub teams, and they're leaders for each sub team. We call them directors. And so as a student, you can join as many sub teams as you want. and then like eventually you end up committing to like 1, 2, or 3 of them just because of how timing works. And so with that, it breaks our team, which can easily hit 70 to 80 members in some years, and it breaks it down into groups of like 10 to 15 at the most that like you're handling at once. And so, and another thing, like as like I don't know, like as we don't want to say this, but like some members just don't get engaged. And so with a team of like 80 people, I think last year we were registered at like 80 something. But by the time build season rolled around, we were down to about 40 to 50 active members. So some people they get in the door and then they kind of just figure out that it's not for them for whatever reason. They don't like robotics. They don't have a time for it. Our build site is about a 30-minute drive through rush hour traffic to get there. So it's not always the most convenient. So a bunch of different factors, but especially with large teams, they do eventually get cut down one way or the other.
Oh, okay, thank you for that. Yeah. Oh wait, also Ricky, you have the presentation, right?
I have the presentation. I'll send it to you afterwards.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I think that's about it. If there's no more questions, Madeline, spotlight's on you.
Well, thank you so much for letting us all present. I hope you guys learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much again. I mean, yeah, some of the people that made it out in our team for WHS, thank you for being here. Honestly, Madeline and the rest of the groups or members that made it here, we can't thank you enough. If we have any other questions, hopefully we can reach out to Madeline and she can do the same, reach out to you guys, and if we
I
have
do
any
one
further
question.
questions.
Pranav, how many world championships did you guys win?
4.
Only 4? Oh man.
What happened in 2019? Oh, wait.
Anyways,
Yeah.
thank you so much for having us and letting us present.
Thank you for presenting for us. You guys gave us so much like useful information. You guys don't understand how helpful this is.
But yeah,
We're glad
for real,
to help.
Daniel, Pranav, and Ricky are all on incredible teams, and they all are very
I'm
skillful.
in college.
Well, you were in a
Yeah.
team.
I'll put my email in the slides. So if you guys have any questions, you can contact
You
me
can also
or
spam
any of the
them.
students.
That's also okay.
Spamming me, sure, that's okay too. I'm usually very bored at college. My dog isn't here, so yeah.
I'll also post my email in the chat, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot me an email.
If that's it, are we free to leave?
Yeah, that pretty much concludes this meeting. So thank you guys once again. I think it's whenever you want, when you can just end the meeting, if it's fine with everybody.
Thank you.
But yeah, thank you guys so
It was
much.
nice meeting you guys. Good luck.
Likewise.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a nice night, guys.
You too.